Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to a really intense week in the life of Dan, because this week is the start of my WSET 3 examinations, and that's a lot of work. Now, I've done level 2. Level 2 asked a few questions, but by and large, if you've got a certain amount of wine knowledge, it's something you can get your head around, and I got through it okay. Level 3, well, that's a different story, and after promising that I would never do any more serious study when I finished university 22 years ago, I'm now back and working hard, but loving every minute we're in today too. The lectures have been fantastic, the content is terrific, there is just an awful lot to learn. And so during the course of today's show, I'll give you a glimpse at how it all works as we sit here at the African Pride Hotel in Melrose Arch, the host of WSET, and show you what we're learning, how we're learning it, and why it could be really valuable if you're somebody in the wine industry. That's not all you will learn today though, because we've got some really cool older journeys for you to take with us on the show. A little later on, we will take you into the heart of Parkhurst and your chance to drink some wine from Constantia Glen, some older reds that go back well over a decade and give you a sense of how the Bordeaux blend that is the Constantia Glen 5 evolves over the course of a number of years. Georgina Wilkinson is the winemaker and she gave us a great trip through some lovely Constantia red. First of all though, we go back even further and go back to the swinging 60s, but not the 1960s, to the 1860s. Duncan Savage is not just a great winemaker, he's also a key member of the Cape Winemakers Guild, and he got hold of some really old Madeira dating back all the way to 1860. And with the new Bascule bar at the Cape Grace having opened, I dragged Duncan along, he brought the Madeira with him, and I got to sample some of the finest and oldest wine I've ever had. So in the past, when I have been at the Bascule at the Cape Grace, it has been to drink whiskey, and very happily so. And when I've been drinking with Duncan Savage, it has been wine, and wine under the Savage brand, by and large. So today, an exception on both counts. While the Bascule is home to one of not just South Africa's, but the world's great whiskey collections, the newly reopened space is today home to some wine of a fortified nature. And it's not Savage wine, it is instead some of Portugal's finest, because Duncan Savage, in an act of generosity high even by your grand standards, you've brought along, this is not so much a collection of drinks as a liquid history lesson to share with me.
It's pretty cool, eh?
It's awesome. I'm looking here and I can see from behind the bottles, not just stuff that looks old from the shape of it and the size of it, but the fact that some of these dates, did I see 1863 on one of these bottles?
Yeah, and it's history in a bottle here. I mean, we came about this obviously doing a tasting for the Cape Winemakers Guild, and it's something I've dreamt about for a long time, to present a Madeira tasting. And it's a category, like a lot of guys have drunk port and the still wines of Portugal, but not a lot of people are exposed to Madeira, and it's these wines of eternal life. I mean, these were opened beginning of June, they were double decanted, they've been standing open now for a while, and they taste better now than they did when we opened them. It's amazing. And I mean, from 1860 up to 1973, it's pretty awesome.
Now, what is it about these wines that allows them to have this longevity, to still be talking to us, 160 years on from when they were produced?
Yeah. Look, it's amazing. Like in the old days, like with Madeira, a lot of the wines, Verdelho, Cercial, these grape varieties, super acidic. So the guys, Hugh Johnson in his book says the stuff was so sour they used it as the ballast of ships and to be drunk only in emergencies. And then the guys realized that they started through sugar and obviously fortification. These wines started to age, and they started to sail. They sailed around the world with these things in barrel in the ships, came back, and it just became too inexpensive a way to produce the wines. So they started then either warming them up in tanks or doing things like that. And then the traditional style is aging in barrel in what they call the lodges. So it sits in an elevated portion of the winery, no insulation for 20. Some of these wines have been in barrel for close to 140 years. It's insane.
The wines are giving us so much to learn from. For me, that's completely understandable. I'm merely an enthusiast. People might be thinking, well, hang on, you make wine, you must know all of this sort of stuff back to front. How much, when you sat down with the members of the Cape Winemakers Guild, did you guys learn from this experience?
Look, it was amazing because no one is an expert. I did my reading. We got Michael Frigen to come and get involved, and Michael, ever eloquent Michael, just so knowledgeable. He gave us a rundown on Madeira. We had Coral Nell there, gives us the insights to fortification. And it was just amazing. I mean, you've got this amazing pool of knowledge in the room. You know, everyone's a little bit at sea because it's a category that everyone's drunk a few times, but people are not experts. And just everyone took their chance to stand up and talk a little bit about the wines. We had Lydia Nebrega from Chapman's Peak Hotel. I said to you earlier, she came and gave us her insights into the island and living, you know, life. It's you don't truly understand a place until you've been there. So we needed someone who'd actually been to the island for a bit of credibility. But it's kind of a walk down, you know, memory lane, and it's well, not really memory lane because none of us were around when any. I mean, you were around in 1860, huh?
Oh, thereabouts. Michael Fridgeon certainly was.
No, but it's quite cool. So Michael helped us with a couple of the wines, and that's the most amazing thing about the Cape Winemakers Guild is we you know, we have an auction every year which people know about, but what people don't always see is these behind the scenes tastings, and this is the real highlight of being a member of the guild. Is we've got budget. And I mean, I blew it a little bit for this, I have to say. Got into a little bit of trouble, but nothing that can't be smoothed over, you know. And we went about tasting what we could taste. We didn't want to just do an average Madeira tasting. We wanted to do the best possible Madeira tasting. And Michael happened to have a client who had a whole lot of wines that he was going to ship to the UK to put on auction, and we happened to intervene and buy a couple of these. So these 1863s, 1860s, and these are the old Solera systems. So I mean, in 1860 was the first time phylloxera was seen in Europe, so it's really old. But Solera's kind of saw their end because of phylloxera. But then you've got all the vintage stuff in the D'Oliveras. But I mean, let's get stuck in, Dan. We didn't come here to look at these.
All right, I'm champing at the bit to taste. While you do pour the first of them, just for people for whom this is a somewhat foreign space, this is a bottle. There is some liquid in it, but it's not wine as we know it. You've used the word fortified once or twice. Very, very simply, what does that mean in terms of what we're drinking?
So look, you know, the wines are fortified. They you're going to get a level of residual sugar depending on the style. So this is a Tarentaise, which is a medium dry style. So you're looking at around about 60 grams of residual sugar. The dry styles, the driest of styles is the Sarciol, which is down to, I think, about between 20 and 30 grams. And then you go up to the Verdelho, which we've got a vertical of from D'Oliveras. And there you're sitting at a level of, you know, but around 40 when they bottle, but by the, when they go to barrel. But by the time they go to bottle, there's been so much evaporation. These are all at 67, 70, somewhere around there. So there's residual sugar, but extreme acidity. So Sarciol, Verdelho, all these varieties are known for their high acidity. So it kind of balances it out. And I think, you know, it's not a wine that you want to drink necessarily when it's young. You want to have that time where they've had that exposure to that warmth in those lagers. In those lodges, where you get that sort of evolution and those secondary and tertiary, Madeirized flavors. But it's not, Madeirized is such a bad word in so many ways because you think of that old cooking stuff, which Madeira was famous for back in the 80s. But when you drink the truly great stuff, it's amazing.
So this has immediately said to me what I think we're going to get from pretty much everything today. We have this terrible term in South Africa and other parts of the world that I'm hoping to somehow change called dessert wine, and people immediately start thinking, oh, it's diabetes in a bottle, I don't want to try this, it's going to be sweet and horrific and Barbie-like. And here this is in this kind of stuff we have for dessert. Normally it's often how we see it, and yet sweet is not the word that comes to mind. Even though it's got that level of sugar, it is so savoury, it is so nuanced. There is so much more to it than just slapping that sweetness tag on it.
Look, to taste these wines, I think that was what was awesome for us as a group was, you know, it's so unique because you've got just over 400 hectares on this little island. I mean, we've got 80,000 hectares here. You go to a place like Sicily, there's 100,000 hectares. Bordeaux, 100,000 hectares. You know, you've got 400 hectares, just over 400 on this little island. And most of that's a variety which is used for the cheaper styles. So to get Sarciol and Verdelho and all of that kind of stuff, it's super rare. I sound like a Madeira salesman.
Look, you're doing a very good job of it, but the wine itself is doing an even better job.
And you'll all see that there's no spittoons on the table because, you know, when you're drinking wines like this, you don't spit them up.
It's criminal. It
Exactly.
is criminal. The only reason to use a spittoon is to remake wine and then send it to Australia. All right, that's a glorious start, but it's this is youthful. This is only just getting going.
45 years in barrel.
45 years.
Only.
Barely started.
Barely started.
All right, first one done.
So that's Tarentaise. So that variety was almost extinct. You know, what we've read about it and obviously never seen the vineyards on the island, but just listening to the guys and what Michael said, I mean, it's quite incredible how little there is. I mean, it's a few hectares. It's tiny.
That's an absolute treat. And again, it's that restraint to a wine that you might think is going to be It's got a big and sweet and noisy. It's nothing of the sort. That was a delight. What comes next on our adventure here?
So what we wanted to do was do a vertical of the De Oliveira's Verdelho, and I think De Oliveira's is an iconic producer on the island. And the thing is that we always do that with normal wine styles. It's so fantastic to put 10 vintages up against one another. You see, the story of time. And I think with this wine, we're seeing a story of time here in a completely different way, because it's, we're talking many, many years.
Well, this is 1973. Neither of us were born at that stage. We were 5 years away from touching down. When I look at the colour, it reminds me of the cough mixture that my mother used to force down my throat. I think it was called Broncolix, and it was awful. This I know is going to taste so much better. As I do try it, what am I looking at here colour-wise? What says this is great? What are the notes of this colour that are important?
Jeez, I don't know. Smell it and taste it. It's fantastic.
Heaven forbid a member of the Cape Winemakers Guild should be able to help me out.
No, it's just time in barrel. You can see the Tarentaise was much lighter in colour. The De Oliveira's wines are darker in colour. So stylistically, maybe they're slightly different. It's a different varietal as well. Less sugar in the Verdelhos, so the evolution of colour will be different in time. Also, the barrels. I don't know. I haven't been there, but it's so damn good.
There is a searing intensity to this.
Incredible.
It just lights up the palate.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the first time I saw you on a dance floor. Just lights up and everybody's they can't quite believe what you're doing. Oh, this is glorious. Is this a space, and I think it is for me, I'm sure it is for you as well, where you kind of feel this desire to spread the gospel, to get people to realise. I opened a bottle of dessert wine at dinner for some friends a few nights ago, and they were quite reluctant to try it. And 10 minutes later, the bottle was finished, and they'd all had 3 glasses, because it's something, for some reason, that's my grandmother used to have that sort of thing. I'm not really interested. And then they try it, and they go, oh my God, this is amazing. Can I please have some more?
Well, the crazy thing is, and what we spoke about the other night, is we romance about these wines, yet people forget we've got these amazing old fortifieds. I mean, we make some incredible port-style wines. I mean, if you go to Boerplaas and De Krans and all those guys, I mean, Carl Nell's a member of the guild, and I buy wines from him. He's a legend. I mean, it's incredible what they've done. But some of those old muscadels, you can drink 100-year-old muscadels, which are as good as these wines. And yet people don't, there's random old wine cellars around. Someone's grandmother has got some stuff lying in a cupboard somewhere. But people don't take those wines always that seriously, and they're actually incredible. Incredible.
All right, this was our first from 1973. We're doing a vertical. We're getting quite aggressive here, because we're going back to 1932. I think this was the wine that was served at Fridge John's 21st, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was 1860, yeah. I know that was his birth year, yeah.
Oh, that's good. All right, so 1932.
So Michael did tell me that he happened to have stumbled on another little stash somewhere, It's not a lot of this stuff going around. It's, you can imagine, as I've said, it's super scarce.
Oh.
So 1932. If you think what was happening in 1932?
1932, let's go back. There was a bit of a depression unfolding. The Germans were starting to find their feet ahead of Mr. Hitler's takeover of Europe.
Yeah.
You've got some notes there. What else was happening?
So we did some anecdotal stuff just, for the hell of it, just to put it in context. And it's quite cool. So if you think in 1973, the population, according to Worldometer, was 3.9 billion. And if you think it's over 8 today, I mean, it's happened, pretty quickly. 32, they reckon it's like the figures on the site seem to, it becomes more estimates after 1950. But around 2 billion people. South Africa gets its new coat of arms. Border and Western Province shared the Currie Cup.
Which is the big one, really.
Louis Late was born. And what you said about, obviously, the World Wars. I mean, Adolf Hitler became a citizen of Germany. Roosevelt became president of the US. A lot of things going on. The depression in the US was, obviously things were not great. But these wines were made.
I think the wine has come through very well, given some difficult times of it. This is now closing in on 100 years old, and it is the beauty of wine, and we see it with the kind of wine you make. When I can open something that's 5, 10, 15 years old, that in itself is history. This is a time capsule, it's something else entirely.
It's insane. Now these wines are and they're just bulletproof. I mean, if you think this has been open for close to a month, and as I say, when we pulled the corks, these came directly from the cellar in De Oliveira's. These older ones, we didn't quite know the provenance. We well cellared, but it's, it was so much sediment. We had to clean it, double decant, clean the bottles, and still, with all that air, they've just opened up beautifully. We haven't gotten to them yet, so let's have a look and see.
So 1932, we're now getting into territory which is pretty rarefied for me vis-a-vis vintage I have encountered. This is just about as old as anything I've ever drunk, and we're only just scratching the surface here.
It's pretty epic, huh? Mm. I'm going to be quite pissed by the end of this.
It's all research, Duncan. It's all research. We head from 32 to 1912, obviously the eve of the outbreak of World War I. Question to ask as we're trying this, the perception of the broader dessert wine category, as horrific as it might be for a name, is that it's something we have after dinner, or possibly as an aperitif. Is there a greater space for this? Is something that you can open up and share a bottle with over dinner for you?
Look, I think that the problem, if you think about it, so like in the old days, the guys went to a dinner party, you had a white wine that was like 12% alcohol. You went on to a bottle of claret, which is 12.5, 13 if it was really ripe, maybe say from, I don't know what the alcohols were like in 82, but they were definitely a lot higher. But in general, things were low. And then you tucked into port and Madeira and, all the sweet wines and the interesting wines, maybe slumming before and then after dinner. Now you go to a dinner party and it's changing a little bit. The wines are becoming more approachable in terms of alcohol. But like a few years ago, the white wine was 14%, the red was 15%. By the time you tucked into port, you knew that the next day was going to be a write-off. and a port and Madeira hangover is not a pretty thing, I have to admit. But it's just, I think people have to realize that that's the beauty of wine. And real wine lovers are always, you go to these dinners and it's actually crazy how many corks get pulled. But that's you can't help yourself. You want to try all these different wines, even if you can't get to everything. And the beauty of some of these fortifieds, like the South African Muscadels, the Madeiras, the ports, you can pull the cork and you don't have to drink the bottle all in one go. You can, these have been open, as I said, for a month. You can do the same with so many of those wines and enjoy them over a week, 2 weeks, whatever.
I'm trying to work out at the moment. This is a 1912. It is in astonishingly good condition. I'm trying to think what ages better from Madeira, the port or their most famous footballer, because he's not that much younger and it doesn't look like he's going anywhere anytime soon. I think Cristiano Ronaldo's probably got another 15 World Cups in him at this rate. He's in your and my kind of shape, so he's doing really well.
I'm glad, yeah.
Oh.
I think the shape thing comment is a very good one. Okay, so let's go to...
it's hard to think we can get any better, and yet we are going even older.
1890.
1890, Otto von Bismarck's time in Europe starting to come to an end, starting to build up towards the concert of Europe.
You're quite a history buff, eh? Have you had a little go with old John Mathern? See who knows the most.
We spent many hours together on radio in my Cat Talk days. Yeah. He's another level entirely, though.
So just as an interesting thing, so the first railway line in the Transvaal was done in 1890. The population of the world was around about 1.5 billion. Cecil John Rhodes became Prime Minister of the Cape Colony. The first English county cricket match took place. Salisbury and Rhodesia was founded, so that's very relevant for you. And Kubota Tractors in Osaka, Japan was formed in 1890.
I love utterly random information like that.
Yeah, but it's cool because it gives you context to how old these wines are.
Oh. It's still, I knew when I sat down, you're not going to give me stuff that you're not impressed with yourself. But I'm so excited by how vivid and intense and alive these wines remain. And in this case, with something that's 134 years old.
And I don't know if I've got info in terms of, it's all, whether it's 104 or 120 years in barrel, it kind of doesn't really matter. Age for 127 years at old oak.
I mean, to have that sort of vision, to say, you know what, I'm backing this so much that I'm going to put it away and it's going to be over a century until this reaches the space where I think it should be. It's a mindset I can't get my head around, especially in our world of TikTok and stories and reels and instant gratification.
I know.
That's the other end of the scale and more.
But imagine having the foresight, that you think that the wine you're drinking, the people that made this wine, the guys that bottled this had absolutely nothing to do with any of the farming, any of the production. Dirk Niepert said to me, we had a wonderful trip up to, we all sell a bit of wines in St. Peter, so a few of us went up there with old Luke, and Dirk brought along an 1863 port, which he had in barrel up until 1972, and then he put it into demijohn. And it was the most alive, incredible experience. I mean, in the bush, tasting a wine like that. And I think he said at the time, he's got like 2.5 million liters going back the last 150 years in barrel, demijohn. I mean, it's amazing the foresight of people to be able to put that kind of thing away, knowing where it can go in the future. And it's incredible. It's a real privilege to inherit something like that.
And that sense of belief, that sense that it's something that I think you and your fellow Cape Winemakers Guild members do have. You have a belief in your own product, but are you sitting there with a bottle of Savage and going, you know what, I think this is going to taste rather nice in 2617 when future generations of Savages can have a taste of the founding fathers' wine. It's just such a distant horizon to consider.
Yeah, but I think the still side of things is never going to age like this. Anything fortified's got way more legs. But I mean now, so we've gone to 1890. Now we're going to the oldest wine, which is an 1860 Solera. So remember, this is not all 1860. The Solera started in 1860. So there will be a few other vintages that came into this. But the Solera system was super popular back then. And then Phylloxera put an end to it because suddenly the guys had this long period where they couldn't pick anything. Had to replant, all that kind of stuff.
Look, it's definitely good. I think it's a bit young. I think you opened it a bit early.
And this is also Cercial, so it's the driest of the styles, and generally seen as not being the long-lived. As long-lived as the others. So you can see, I would say this when we opened it was the wine is starting to fade a little bit. I think it's had quite a bit of air. I think it's still beautiful, but when we opened it the first time, it was quite something.
Oh,
I mean 1860. So just my little facts here, just to put it in context. So 1860, like roughly about 1.3 billion people. The first telegraph service between Cape Town and Simonstown, Alfred Dock, was opened. The seat of government was transferred from Potch to Pretoria, and we've got the first British Open Golf Championship was played. The first iron-hulled ship was launched, and Abraham Lincoln became the 16th president of the USA when this wine was made.
It was
insane.
A pretty good year all round.
Yeah.
To Abe, the Open Championship, and steel-hulled ships. Oh, and it almost, even if it was only just vaguely drinkable, you'd still revel in it because of the age. And yet it's so much more than that. This is just an utter delight to still drink.
It's amazing. Jeez, I haven't got a steady hand. And even after drinking Madeira, I still don't have a steady hand.
Oh.
1863 Malmsey from Leacock's. And so Malmsey is generally a sweeter style. Malmsey and Buell are the sweeter styles. And I mean, this wine, it's quite cool. I love these. You see it in the old Riesling bottles, that blue glass. I think I don't know what Libbestein, I don't know if that was bottled in blue glass. That South African wine.
It does just add to the general cool factor.
I think it's super cool.
And I've always felt 1863 was a particularly good vintage. I've always looked back on that one fondly. Oh yeah, immediately. More honeyed, slightly more viscous.
It's incredible, eh?
Oh. Are you sure these are what you sell and you haven't just rebottled these with some Bourplas and you're pulling one over me on camera?
But that's the thing, these wines, people, and I think that what happened was the price of Madeira has just gone absolutely crazy. And it's again, it comes back to, you can pick up old South African muscadels for next to nothing. And those wines should be they should be in the top tier category pricing wise. These wines, couldn't give these things away many years ago. I think the 80s, they had a bit of a dip. But in COVID, people weren't sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. They were all just, drinking way too much. And people started discovering all these Madeiras in their cellars. And suddenly the price has just gone like this. It's unbelievable. I mean, to give you an idea, I did put the prices up. So that Magnum is over 40,000. These de Oliveras ranging from about, I don't know, 5,000 a bottle to the 1890 at 28,000 Rand. These two older vintages, because the provenance wasn't as good, were around about 15,000 a bottle, and that's for 750 mils. Eh? But I think, you've got this little time capsule. It's pretty cool.
It's amazing. Oh, I could do this all day. Sadly,
You got to try one more.
But there is one more, and I'm quite excited about this one.
Because this is pretty amazing. It's the Brandy's Buell is.
You've kept this one to the end. It's not the oldest one. Why have you kept this one?
Just because it's a much sweeter style.
Okay.
So we were worried when we did the lineup. We were worried it was going to overpower the rest of the wines. And when do you ever see Madeira in a Magnum? You have to.
A 1920 Magnum of Madeira.
If you tackle this in one night, you're going to be prepared for a big hangover the next day.
But gee, it would be worth it when you recovered a week later.
You need to have quite a few mates around. But again, this thing, so you open it and you drink it over 6 months.
And that's exactly what you can do with this sort of wine. I've got some 1948, some South African port as it was then, Cape Vintage as we know it now.
Was that from the Carib Levy?
Yes, it was indeed.
Those old Superior bottlings, yeah.
Really, really good. And my mother is born in 1948. We opened it for her, and several months later, it's still topping up nicely.
That's amazing. We found a whole bunch of bottles in my mother-in-law's cabinet, and Bulla and I proceeded to drink 2 bottles in one night because it was so good. We didn't feel so good the next day, I have to say.
But there is something so Moorish, so alluring, so rich and deeply appealing about this very style. And when it's made exceptionally well, so much more. And then when you start delving into these sorts of vintages, even for an acclaimed member of the Cape Winemakers Guild and his compadres, to have an evening over these wines is particularly memorable.
But it's a real privilege. I mean, we've been super, I've been a member of the Guild since 2008. And I think some of the greatest wines I've tasted in my life, from doing tastings like this to, we had Aubert de Villon, he obviously that great domain sells the Romani Conti wines. Aubert came out, loves the bush. He did a tasting. I don't know if you ever went to any of those tastings. He did one in Joburg, one in Cape Town, and one for the Guild. And we sat down with the owner of Romani Conti tasting the entire 09 vintage. I mean, you can't just do that. It's insane. So I think it offers an amazing platform, for your, sitting with your peers, sharing knowledge, tasting these incredible wines. And it's a real privilege, you get to do this kind of stuff. And if we had normal still wines, we wouldn't have been able to, a month after the time, sit and taste the leftovers.
Exactly.
With Madeira, we could do this. So it's been awesome.
It's an absolute delight. I thank not just you, but the Guild as well. And I love the fact that you guys get together and are able to do this kind of thing and still get so excited by wine, even though you've been making it for so long and doing so much with it. And then sharing that knowledge with people like me and sharing that excitement, for which I am most grateful. This has been an absolute delight. I'm going to try and steal a bit more before we wrap up. But I can say, as the Bascule reopens here at the Cape Grace, they've had some pretty incredible bottles here over the years. But some port from the 1860s from some of the great houses of Madeira, I'd wage a pretty good bet that these are as good as anything that the Bascule has seen. Get down here to try out some whiskey. Ask very nicely then, you never know. Maybe Duncan Savage will have snuck a bottle or two of Madeira behind the bar, and you can try some of that out as well. Cheers. So that was a magical spell with Duncan Savage. Madeira going back to 1860, and as you saw there with the wines tasted, the extraordinary element of that, wine almost 150 years old and yet still so fresh, so vital, and so much fun to drink. More fun wine to drink coming up in a moment, but first of all, what I'm doing here and why I'm doing it. This is WSET 3. We've had another morning of lectures. My head is spinning completely. It is full with all sorts of detail on white Burgundy and the Rieslings of the Mosel and other parts of white wine in Europe. And that's just a tiny fraction of everything that we have to do through the duration of the course. I'm not going to take you through the entire course, we'll be here for hours, but here's just an element of what we do and why this is so valuable. It's the understanding of wine, why what you taste, you like, you don't like, how you understand the quality and the different components of a wine. And you do something called the SAT, which is your assessment of the wine. It works very simply. You have a look at it and you have a look at the colour. In this case, according to WSET, they would say that this is pale lemon. So it's a very clear, very light colour, and the lemon, well, that's pretty evident. Then look at the nose and the intensity. If you can pick it up from about there, then it's kind of the blue cheese of wine, and you know it's very pronounced. As you get closer and you finally pick it up, that'll tell you where it sits. So in this case, probably a medium plus based on what the assessment is. You then work your way through what you're picking up on the nose, what sort of flavours. In this case, it's a white wine, and on this, getting all sorts of different kinds of fruit, and you pick them up as you go through. From there, you head on to other elements of it on the palate, and once you've tried it, you do something I never do, which is use a spittoon. And this is very important because we keep the spittoons and then we send the wine to Australia where they bottle it as premium stuff. This is your chance to see how the nose and how the palate pair up. And generally here, one should match the other. If they're very different, then something's gone wrong somewhere along the line. And what I've been able to do through this is get a sense of what I'm tasting, why I'm tasting it, the finish of the wine, the clarity, and all of that adds up to how good a wine I think this is. Now the wine in particular here is pretty cool. It's some Riesling from Austria. It's a part of the world you might not be too familiar with in terms of wine, but this has been a really interesting, really cool aromatic style of wine to try. I've really enjoyed it, but I've enjoyed it more because I've now got a better understanding of why I'm enjoying it, what the different components are, what the qualities are, and how to break it down to understand what I like, what I don't, and how that can then dictate other wines that I like. Now, that said, it's not about being subjective. You've got to be as objective as you can. It can be an outstanding wine that you don't really like. You're looking at how well it's made, how well it's produced, and where it sits. And that really is at the core of this particular course. If you're interested, well, head over to the WSET website and find out a bit more about it. It starts at level 1, on to level 2. We're now at level 3, which is terrifying already. The thought of a diploma is enough to have me reaching something a little stronger than just a glass of wine. Right now, trying to get through 3, which means I need to get back to work. While I get back to work, I'll send you down to Parkhurst into a Bark restaurant where a few days ago I got to catch up with Georgina Wilkinson and chat not about white wines as you might expect from Constantia, but instead about red, looking at the five Bordeaux grapes whipped into one lovely blend from a part of the world that is making really, really good reds, and in the case of Georgina, a red that can age rather well. By the time you're watching this, it'll probably be a little warmer around South Africa, but this morning in Johannesburg has been positively Arctic. -3 degrees when I rolled out of bed, went to gym, took a photo and went straight home, having done absolutely nothing, preparing for something far more appropriate for cold weather. Because Georgie, you have bought some red wines at Johannesburg on a day like today. That is most welcome.
Yeah, it's the perfect day for some red wine.
It's something I remember my UCT days, living in Cape Town. The moment you hit winter, it was cold, it was wet, it was horrible. Red wine was perfect. We don't get the rain up in Johannesburg, but it does get even colder, and that makes red wine absolutely perfect for this time of year. And it comes from somewhere that I often feel needs a little bit of a reminder to people as to the quality, because for so many, the moment we think of Constantia, we say, that's great white wine. It's the Constantia blend of Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and yet across a number of the estates, red wine is actually something you guys do so well.
Yeah, so I think it's something that we definitely pushing forward, especially with this cold weather. It's great. But we also are on the northern end of the valley, which helps us a lot. We have a lot of northeast facing slopes, so we have a lot of sunlight hours, which helps for long, slow ripening of the red grapes. And so we found that our property specifically is really perfect to produce these beautiful Bordeaux red blends.
And you've got a couple of them, the 3 and the 5, have won all manner of awards over time. When you come into making this wine, working with Justin as the cellar master, there's a certain expectation, isn't there, that you guys have won loads of awards, you've done really well, there is wine made so well from Constantia Glen, you've got to keep that going.
Yeah, but luckily the grapes speak for themselves, and because our wines are estate wines, that really helps. We've got an amazing team that I've got working with, so yeah, that really helps. I don't have to stress too much. The grapes speak for themselves.
I had a conversation with a guy called Jan from Chateau Kerouan in Bordeaux a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how He feels Bordeaux blend is a misnomer because what he drinks in Bordeaux is very different to what we drink in South Africa. And it's really there because of the grapes and what make them up. When you look at your interpretation from Constantia Glen, of a Bordeaux blend, and you place it in the context of a traditional Bordeaux blend, which in itself could mean all sorts of things depending on where it's made, what do you feel is the fundamental difference?
So I think the region in itself, we are a cool climate region, but because of where we're situated, we get the great sunlight hours, the soils, and also the ocean influence. We are about 7 to 9 kilometers as the ocean flies. I mean, as the crow flies to the ocean. So so I think there's a lot of differences in the region, and I think the main basis that it's based off is the grape variety that we use. But we do want to make it in our own unique style. It's a Bordeaux style, but definitely a good representation of the valley itself.
All right, well, we've got 2 examples here, and if you're wondering what is in these glasses, I shall let Georgie, our winemaker, tell us. It's the same wine, but from a slightly different vintage.
Yeah, so we've got the 2012 in the left glass, and then the 2021 in the right glass. And I think what's really amazing, time and time again, every time I do a vertical tasting, I'm reminded of how beautifully the Constantia Glen wines age. We have great natural acidity, so that works in our favour hugely. And I think that the great thread between them all is always elegance and vibrance, which still shows really well in the 2012, which is really special. I mean, there'll always be vintage variations, and the 2012 was still quite new, so the first red blends were started in 2007, and the style was a little bit different. There was a lot more Petit Verdot, so the 2012 is actually more Petit Verdot than Merlot, whereas the Constantia Glen that we're tasting today has a lot more Merlot in it. It's always cab driven, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot, whereas the 2012, the Petit Verdot and Merlot sort of swap places. So this still has 27% Petit Verdot, which is quite interesting.
That's a big chunk for Petit Verdot.
Yeah.
It's a little unusual.
A little bit unusual, but also beautiful to see how the wines, the evolution of the wines and how beautiful they are still, 12 years.
Thinking back 12 years, because at time travel that you get to do to your wine is so cool. I go back 2012, I was just finishing school, obviously. What were you doing 12 years ago?
That's interesting, because I think I was finishing university. No, I think I was in my 3rd year varsity, so I was nearly finishing, but my love for wine was growing and growing, so it was a good year.
All right, well, let's have a taste of this. This is going back now to 2012. Cheers.
Cheers.
Oh, it's always at the moment you get wine past a certain age, you start. I think the key worry is it going to develop that slight mustiness?
Yes.
Is it going to have aged before its time? Something I'm often accused of, sadly. Is it just not quite at its best? Already just from the nose, all you're getting is that richness, and it's roaring up the nostrils, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful.
Really good for a cold, crisp day in Johannesburg. Even better, I'd imagine, next to a roaring fire in Constantia.
Absolutely. There's no better place.
All right. Well, for many people who watch this, they understand there's something about aging wine, but the actual mechanics, in very simple terms, why is it that 12 years later, this is drinking so well?
So, I mean, the biggest thing is that it's aged well in the right conditions, but I think it's just the evolution of the tannins, and the acidity hasn't gone flat, which is often a risk with aging wines, is that when you open it 12 or 15 years later, you lose that acidity and that freshness. But luckily with the natural acidity that we have in Constantia, we don't have that problem. So that brightness is still there, and just that beautiful elegance is still really shining through.
I did a tasting the other day at the Cape Grace with Duncan Savage with some vintage port and Madeira, and he was telling me about a particular estate in Portugal where they put their port in barrel for 140 years. That kind of vision for the future I can't really get my head around. To what extent are you looking at the wine you're making in the 2024 vintage and thinking, right, I want this to be drinking perfectly in 12 years' time?
Well, I think it's a difficult, an interesting conversation, because I think that the tradition of aging wine is not like it used to be. But I do think there's something really special about cellaring a wine and opening it. But I think we've also become too attached to our wine. So you put it away and you're like, oh no, we can't drink this till a special occasion. And then it's sort of, when is that special occasion? So at some point you have to open it and enjoy it. But the luxury for me is that I work here, and we obviously have a whole lot of stuff that we keep back for library stock. And we've been doing quite a few of these vintage tastings of the 5, which has been amazing to see how beautiful they're still tasting. The dream is for a wine to be able to age for as long as possible, but also the challenge is that it's able to drink. So the 2021, you want it to be drinkable at that as well. So you don't want to make a wine that's not able to drink now, but you can drink it in 10 years' time. So you sort of want to find that good balance, for sure, in my opinion.
The key part there, I work here, so we have lots of stock. Send that Facebook friend request as fast as you can. All right, let's jump forward. So we've been drinking 12 years. I can drink that all day very happily, and if possible, I will. But an intermission to shoot forward to the future. And we are now drinking 21, is that right?
Yes,
21.
So that's the current vintage that we are currently selling.
Again, looking back to some of the shows we've done, I remember last year, Angela Lloyd, who has been writing about and judging wine since the late 1700s, was talking about South African red wine and how we have this amazing ability to age, but we also make wine that you can drink quite young, and a lot younger than we spoke about France earlier, than often a Bordeaux equivalent. And a lot of our younger wine isn't quite as tightly wrung. It doesn't have quite that tannic attack when you open it up. It's a really nice balance to be able to have with wine.
Absolutely, yeah, and I agree, and I think that's a big part of what we aim for, is that you need to sell the wine now as well, so you don't want something that's not drinkable, and you want people to taste it and enjoy it. So we normally, our wines are in barrel for 2 years and then in bottle for a year, so that's kind of our aging process at the cellar, and then it should be able to drink well from then. So.
Does it still, you've been making wine for a while now, does it still surprise you? Is there still that magic at just how what starts as a bunch of grapes can not only become a bottle of wine, but 5, 10, 12 years down the road still captivate you, still put that smile on your face? Absolutely,
it's amazing, and I think that's where the joy comes in, is being part of the whole process. I'm still pretty young in the winemaking industry, so I haven't quite had a wide range of vintages that I can stand behind and be like, oh, I remember this was vintage, but just to be able to have a couple of vintage behind my back, it's really cool. It's a great product of all the hard work, and obviously you're working with something that relies on Mother Nature, so every vintage has its own challenges, so it's always lovely to taste through the product and understand that something good's come of it. So, I mean, for example, last year in Cape Town we had those terrible floods. So it was a really, really hard vintage, and when we went into our blending tasting, we all sort of held our breath, expecting the worst, and we were also surprised and really, really chuffed with what the product that we came after. It's such a hard vintage. So yeah, the reward is always there, which is great. And then obviously opening up an older vintage that still tastes great is a huge reward.
And doing so when it's minus 11 outside, all the more so. Very quickly, we're focusing on red wine, and that's all I'm intending to drink today, with one brief exception, because I do have a soft spot for your 2, which is your Bordeaux white style, not only because it's such a lovely wine, and when it starts, it's got this electric freshness to it, but it's also a wine I've discovered that you give it 5-6 years, and it starts to meander into also such a warm and welcoming place.
Yeah, it is also one of my favorites. And it's a special wine to work with. I think that it's something interesting, and people it's not as common to be drinking that. So when you do present something like that to people and they enjoy it, it's like that cherry on top that really makes you excited.
The aging of white wine, something we're still learning a little about here in South Africa. What I have learned today is something I largely knew, but was certainly reinforced, and that's A, how good your wine is, and B, how nice it is to have it a little older, but also, even in its early days, it has so much to offer. I think the only thing left to do really is put a date in the diary, 9 years' time, to see how this 21 is looking after 12 years.
But you have to buy a case, so you can drink a bottle every year.
Done. Salesperson as well as winemaker. Georgie, thank you. Some lovely wine. And thank you for bringing it up on a very cold Johannesburg morning.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank
Cheers.
you. Cheers. Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So that was some 12-year-old Bordeaux, but also some more recent Bordeaux, or at least Bordeaux style out of Constantia. And a couple of things to take out of there. One, a reminder, Constantia's not just about white wine. Those reds were exceptional. And although Georgina didn't make the original 2012, she's got a fantastic understanding of what has gone into creating the style of that wine. And a wine that's got such depth and expression. Yes, certainly different to what an actual Bordeaux blend might be, but I think pretty good use of the 5 grapes in question. And I'll be fascinated to see how that 2021 we drank ends up in 9 years. We have that date in the diary. I also have a date provisionally for doing my diploma, but I might need a date for redoing level 3 as well, because gee, it is tough, but it's so interesting. And the fascination of wine channeled into this course is terrific. And some of the things we've been through today have included whites, and to leave you on what's a really nice point of comparison as we look at wine from around the world. So this is Vouvray from the Loire Valley. This is top-end Chenin Blanc from France, but it's not Chenin Blanc as we know it from South Africa, because the Chenin we have in South Africa is bursting with life, bursting with sunshine, bursting with energy, whereas the Chenin from France, a lot more restrained, a lot more linear, wine that doesn't express itself quite as much. And this has been a great illustration of this, and again, placing in the context of the WSET understanding of wine, getting a real sense of why that is and how I'm tasting different things on the palate, how I'm interpreting the wine in different ways. So yes, it has been a lot of hard work. I've written more than I have in about the last 20 years, desperately trying to copy notes from people beside me, so pretty similar to university days, but also genuinely being interested in what's playing out and how I'm learning so much more about a subject I'm already so passionate about. So if you like the idea of WSET, have a crack, try level 1, go on to 2, see how you go from there. You really just will learn not so much about wine as a whole, but your own understanding of wine and why you do and don't like particular things. And that does it for this week. Thank you very much for joining us. A big thank you to Leon and to the team, Stacey and the team down at the Cape Grace. The new Bascule bar is phenomenal, all the more so when you've got a 150-year-old Madeira to take. Thanks to the guys down in Parkhurst and Embark for putting on a splendid lunch alongside with the Constantia Glen Reds, and to the team here at African Pride for looking after us as we study for WSET 3, and hopefully alongside my far more accomplished fellow students, we'll all be smiling come the first week of August when exams will be done, and fingers crossed I'll have passed. This is Dan Really Likes Wine at Norman Goodfellows. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.